All right, well, thanks for joining us today as we go through more of the legislative session. There seems to always be plenty of bills that can be reviewed, but I did want to check first and see if any of you had any particular bills you wanted us to bring up and look at before we get started.
There was one that I had a question about. I did not write down which code or which bill it was. So if you don't want to look it up, that's fine. But I know it's sponsored by Todd Wheeler. And as I
Okay.
understand it, it's a change in how long sexual predators need to stay on the sexual offender registry in Utah.
Yeah. I believe, if I can remember right, it's SB 155. Yeah, so I have it here. I'll share the screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So, Senator Weiler, and I guess, Brian, did you have any specific concerns with this or just kind of wanted to see what it was doing?
I wanted to get specifics on what it was doing because I just saw a response on Reddit and I didn't actually read the bill.
Okay. So he is proposing that I think I haven't spoken with him, but my sense is that he's kind of proposing a chance for people to move on from past things they did. And so if you look at the bill, you can see some of the things changing here. They have, 20 years is being proposed to reduce to 12 years with this part about them having to register. He's coming from, he says that if you get a petition denied, you used to have to wait 8 years to resubmit. Now it's to wait 5 years. And then he has these parts here. And this is interesting. This bill has changed quite a bit since I looked at it. I looked at it last week. It's changed a lot. So it's on a substitute. So let's see. Okay. So there's an SB 41 it looks like we need to look at. So if they both become law. So this one is if the offender was under 21 and the offense did not involve force or coercion, then I think that again, we'd have to look at some of these things. Because this is amending SB 41 and then amending SB 41. So let me pull up SB 41 just to make sure we're getting the right thing here. This one's on the third substitute. So these have been going through. Wow. See, look at this. They're recodifying the statutes applicable to the Sex, Kidnap, and Child Abuse Offender Registry. So what that means is that you can see here just this long list of laws that are being changed. They're renumbering portions of code. They're enacting. You can see all these new things. So this is quite the long bill. So I may have to look at this one offline because you can see over here, it's just barely moving. It's let's see how long this bill is. 5,333 line bill. Before though, I can tell you before what the proposal was, and I bet it's similar. So last week, the proposal was to make it so that certain offenses were no longer lifetime registration offenses, and you could petition to be removed from the registry after, I think it was 10 or 12 years or something, if you hadn't had any further offenses. My sense of SB 155 is that, yeah, so 12 years, so they may petition the court for an order of removal from the registry if 12 years have passed. And there's still some offenses that are lifetime offenses, I think, based on his original thing. But they certainly have made this much more difficult to understand what's going on. Before you could look at his bill, I guess we can even pull it up. We can go back to the original. So this was the original that he had here. So it used to, his original, so like these sections, these were some of the crimes he was proposing to remove from the lifetime offense. So any of these in this one that were crossed through, so line 49, line 58, 59, these offenses, he was saying, I want to make it so that people can have a chance to get off the registry and move on. So there were definitely some things that people were concerned about, such as sexual exploitation of a minor. It sounds really bad. That could be something like statutory rape, where you were 19 and your girlfriend or boyfriend was 17. But it could be worse too, and so you have to go to these sections to see exactly what they're talking about. I know they've had a lot of pushback on this, which is one reason why there's been a lot of changes to it. But this is, yeah, again, this is, you can go through and see there's some things he proposed adding in. Let's see. It talks, oh, this part was to clarify what happens if they were on a lifetime list, and then what happens if their offense is removed from the lifetime list as a result of this bill. So I know that the way it was worded originally was very ambiguous. The people that had me look at it were concerned about the language being too ambiguous, and I felt it was pretty ambiguous. And so they did push back on that, and I think it's one reason why we've ended up here with them trying to coordinate it with SB 41, but SB 41 is crazy long, and I have not been through that yet. So, but curious if you have thoughts or concerns about changing some of the sexual crimes to make it so that people can get off the registry at some point.
In theory, I like that idea, especially for near-age statutory rape situations. I am concerned it creates a loophole for well-represented individuals that are guilty of more extreme crimes to get off the registry.
Yeah, and again, it did, I know the original bill left a fair number of things on, but I didn't go through line item by line item to see exactly what things that pulled off or kept on. I know that Senator Weiler has traditionally been an advocate for, victims or people or not wanting to have kind of a promotion of sexual misconduct in society. But I don't know particularly what this bill is, and I don't know why there's so much going on with it, because you look at this one, and it talks about coordinating with, there's a lot going on. So we have the sex offender stuff, we have HB 21, where they're recodifying the criminal code, and then they have SB 24, child abuse and torture amendments. So there's a lot of coordination going on in things that are being changed. And there's a lot moving in Utah right now. I've never loved these recodifications that they do. They come and they change all the statutory references and things. So it makes it really hard to follow laws and their development, because you can, for example, be looking at a case and it says, you know, UCA 27-4-2 or whatever. You go to it, but it's been totally changed. And you're just going, why do we feel the need to recodify things? And that's happening right now with trusts in Utah, with estate planning, wills, all that kind of stuff. They're changing all the code references. And then, yeah, I've never fully understood why they do it or what the goal is behind it. But there's a lot of recodifications proposed this time. So someone's at work with some ideas. But
I agree.
I don't know if anyone knows any more on the child sex abuse side and the sex offender registry.
Well, I have a comment. I went to an event on Saturday. Delaney England spoke about this bill, said it's one of the most horrific bills this year. And she did mention what you have, that these, 41 and SB 41 and 155 are companion bills. And SB 41, like you said, it has like what, 5,333 lines, I think. This is the meat, right? All the meat is on this one, but there were two people there that have worked in the past with sex offenders law office. I can't remember what, but they said there's basically no cure for sex offenders. It's an addiction. Oftentimes they'll clean up for a couple years and they'll come back. I have a friend who was abused by her stepfather in 1998. She reported it. He scared her. She didn't say anything until 2008. She reported it. He was currently in prison serving for another sex abuse case. And then last year in 2024, he was 27 years after abusing her. He was in prison for his fifth charge. And but she made the comment. She said this sex registry is not designed to punish; it's to protect women and children. And this is a pretty horrific bill. I mean, and especially if we understand what's going on with the state of Utah, Cox is wanting to give $3 million to the Sundance Institute this year, which is so involved in horrific films, sex with children. They have a film with a 17-year-old girl that's forced to have sex with three gay men. Like, the Sundance Institute is corrupt. And so it all circles back. You look at, why is Cox and wanting to donate money to this? Anyway, I just think this is a super dangerous bill, and we need to do everything we can to stop both SB 155 and 41. So, it needs to be zero tolerance, I think, if you look at the list here of, kids that are sexually abused, ritualistic abuse, it's pretty horrific. So we need to protect them.
Yeah, and I think most agree with that. The thing I have seen in the law is that, for example, the example of statutory rape, if you're a 19-year-old dating a 17-year-old, that's a little bit different situation than a perpetrator or something. And you can be listed for a very long time and it can impact your life for a very long time. And I know some of the sex offender laws, they get, they'll crack down and say we're going to be super tough. And so there was one guy, I think that he had, this was in Michigan when I was in law school, and the guy had pulled over and I think he was urinating on the side of the road or something. And it was kind of in a filled area. There wasn't a lot of people around, but it was considered a sex offense under Michigan law. And so he was listed on the registry for that. And I think that, to Brian's point, we have to have a proper balance of what's an actual perpetrator and what's not. I'm not pretending like this bill strikes that balance. But I do think that when we have a very heavy hand of saying you are going to be on a sex offender registry, we should make sure that it's, real perpetrators or people with issues like that. Because another thing that's come up in Utah, this was passed, I believe it was last session. They passed a law that said all youth organizations, which includes any church, any nonprofit, any group that does anything with 25 or more kids, they're mandated by law to have all of their volunteers and employees checked against the sex offender registry. And if you don't, then the organization, and it appears the employee that didn't check or the volunteer that didn't check, can be personally liable for anything that happens to that person or that a child if they get molested. And so there's a couple of pieces with that, where if you had a statutory rape scenario, you're on the registry, then you can never, for the rest of your life, essentially do anything with youth. But one of the things that happens with that is, let's say you're going to church and you suddenly are asked to say, hey, can you help with the youth? And you say, no, I can't. Or sure I can, and then they check and they go, oh, wait, you're on the registry, whatever. It starts to drive people away from the association side. And even if you think about things like junior jazz basketball, we have it's run by volunteers mostly. The coaches are volunteers, all these others are volunteers. And I'm not saying we want a perpetrator in there, but when the list picks up all kinds of people, and then when the person running junior jazz can be personally liable for anything that happens to a kid if they don't check the registry, they're going to start to check it for all parents. Because if you just happen to step in for a coach that day or whatever, and it's the same with church, you have to start just checking it for everyone, because can someone show up to youth activity anymore? Can someone not? You don't know. And it really starts to make this scenario in society where we are alienating people more and more. And I get to your point, there's a lot of people that say they can't be rehabilitated. I think there's certain things that are that way, but I also believe that there are some offenses that we list that people do get past and move on from. And then it's a question of, are we doing the right thing or not? And all that. So, but again, that's not to say that I support this bill necessarily. The people that have reached out to me about it, there's been a lot of concerns from people that know more, and they've pushed back quite a bit. So I assume there's things in there that shouldn't be lessened, or the protections lessened. But yeah, but there's quite a few things going on with this. And I can comment on the child abuse and torture modifications. That's one that I think came as a result of Gavin Potter, the boy that was tortured by his father and died. The legislature promised to crack down on that, and so that creates additional criminal penalties for people that torture kids. But again, a lot moving here, a lot of moving parts, and so it'd be interesting if anyone had the time to dive into this one all the way and follow it through.
Also curious if there's any medical or psychological associations that come out with standards on how laws should be acting with sexual offenders.
And that would be interesting. I don't know. I don't have knowledge on that. But that'd be a good point to look up.
I'll look into that.
That'd be awesome. Okay, so this time I actually wanted to talk about a principle that I think is very difficult for all of us to figure out. And this is something I wrestle with all the time. I don't fully have a complete answer to. And it's not so much about elections. This bill will just highlight, I think, part of the issue. But I think it'll be helpful to talk about as we look at bills and try and decide what we do or don't do with them. So HB 369, talking about elections office. This bill is proposing that Utah take the oversight and authority for elections from the lieutenant governor and place them within elections office. And there will be members of a board, essentially, that sit with the elections office. And then there will be a director who will serve as the chief election officer of the state. This is also a very long law. If you look at everything it's amending, very lengthy. So we won't go through it all, but let me just go down to the appointment portion, which I think is where some of the issues are. Yeah, we only have a few thousand lines of code to go through. Hopefully I didn't pass it already. Had a bunch of red. There we go. So what this proposes is that there's an independent state agency known as the Elections Office. And then they create an appointing committee at the beginning. And the appointing committee consists of 2 county clerks selected by the governor, 1 county clerk selected by the president of the Senate, 1 county clerk selected by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and 1 county clerk selected by the state auditor. So I was curious. I don't usually see the auditor appointing people. And then these individuals that are described here, so this appointing committee, then they select the first, they then select an appointing committee, and they select a new appointing committee every 4 years. And they can select a county clerk that's on it, so they can kind of select themselves or new people. And then this appointing committee, by a majority vote of the members of the appointing committee, appoints a director to administer the elections office. And they establish the salary for that director. It gives some qualifications for what the director has to have. They have to be familiar with federal and state election law. They have to be familiar with the state's election system. They have to have strong management interpersonal skills. They shall be a nonpartisan individual who is not affiliated with a political party. And they can't hold an elective office or run for elective office while they're serving as director. So curious at the outset, before we talk about some of the quandary that I think we find ourselves in often, what are your thoughts on this proposal to create an independent elections office? Anyone
I don't
have?
like it. It needs to be elected from the citizens, not appointed by the governor and the auditor. And so, yeah, I don't like this bill.
Okay, so you're looking at it saying we need whoever it is to be subject to an election.
Yes.
Do you like the idea of an independent elections office if it was elected by the people?
An independent elections office. I mean, I'd like an elected secretary of state. I don't know what you mean by an elected office.
Well, just any elected official whose sole job was elections that you got to elect. So a secretary of state's kind of the same thing. We're saying, you know, we get to elect our secretary of state, and the secretary of state administers elections. So no matter what you call the elections office.
Oh, yeah, I do. I think
Okay.
it needs to be voted by the people, by we the people.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, just surface level, it looks like a single party's attempt to exert more controls over elections. I'm not sure what the goal or the powers of the election office would be, or what problem they're trying to fix. So I'd like clarification on those 2 things.
Yeah, so to give some insight into what's happened. So Utah has become, I should say, there's been a fair number of people in Utah that have become frustrated by conflicts of interest that arise with the lieutenant governor's office. And so we had situations, some of the situations from last year with the election where our lieutenant governor was sitting on Derek Brown's campaign finance committee. Essentially, she was helping to raise funds. She was a chair of the committee helping to raise funds for him. And then she would be making decisions, working with county clerks, making decisions on what qualified as signatures for different candidates, including candidates for governor. There was the issue with the fact that a lot of people were alleging that Governor Cox did not get enough signatures and they weren't valid. And she issued a directive that told all county clerks not to release those signatures, even though they had released other signatures of other candidates. And so it started to create this issue where people were realizing, whoa, we have this problem of lieutenant governor potentially being conflicted or having issues. And so there was actually a lot of talk last year about the need to make an independent elections office that the governor's not over. Some people talked about a Secretary of State. Utah used to have a Secretary of State. And they consolidated it, put it a lot with the lieutenant governor. And that was quite a while ago. So some people talked about moving back to that. From my perspective, as I looked at it, I went, well, I'm not sure what solves the problem of an elected official being conflicted about their own election if that official is over their own election. And I think a number of people have seen that the Secretary of State doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because if they're still elected and they're administering elections, they can still be swayed to call their own election or do different things. And so I think that this came as a proposal saying, yeah, we're listening, or this guy at least is listening. We want to create this independent office. I highly doubt this will go through. But like you say, you start to look at it and then you go, well, okay, do the powers that be care where the election official sits, whether it's in the lieutenant governor's office or the secretary of state's office or an elections office, if they can control it? And when you look at who gets to appoint the committee, you start to go, oh, so it's the governor, the president of the Senate, the speaker of the House, and the state auditor. That's definitely one political party that's now fully controlling the elections. There is the line that the individual has to be nonpartisan and not affiliated with a political party. But my bet is all that means in reality is they just have to register as independent right before they're appointed. I don't know that would hold a lot of weight. But to me, one of the quandaries we look at with a bill like this is, when I look at the elections, I personally feel that we need to clean up elections some. I do believe there's some pretty strong conflicts of interest that start to come in and affect some of the decisions of the officials, and I would love for there to be more checks and balances. And last year during this time, I did propose that one of the solutions would be to make county clerks, say we could have a board of county clerks. I was talking about all the counties in Utah, but let them serve as a board that administers elections in Utah. And each county clerk couldn't oversee their own election, but they would oversee everything else as a board. And so a county clerk might oversee the election of a different county clerk, or a board of them would. And I'm not saying that my proposal was the best or anything. I'm just saying I started talking about that, saying that it was a solution to the issue. And then it was interesting to see this come through. But when I look at it, I go, I would love for there to be some more checks and balances. I think that for elections to be pure, we need a lot more independence with some checks and balances. But I'm very uncomfortable with letting the governor and the speaker of the Senate and House select the committee that then gets to, in perpetuity, select its own committee members. I'm very wary of situations where they want more power to appoint and less oversight and accountability to the people. And so I look at a bill like this and I go, there's, I think, a good piece that we're removing it some from lieutenant governor's office or the governor's oversight. But then there's the piece, the question of, but are we really, and is it a step in the right direction? Because the way that our laws become bad and corrupt is that they don't do it all immediately. They start with a piece and they're happy just to get it one step further towards something, one step further. And every legislative session, they can take it a step further. But on the flip side, when we're trying to push back and propose good legislation, one of the things that happens quite often is that we become kind of all or nothing, and we demand that everything be cleaned up today and the bill be perfect, or else we won't support it. And I look at it and go, should we, just say strongly that the bill needs to be perfect and we don't vote for it unless everything's in line? Or should we say, if we can gain some ground this time, can we then further gain ground? Is the bill the type that we could further gain ground with? And again, I view there are people that plan and scheme, and they know very well that, oh, as long as we can get that through this year, we can then tweak it a little, get more through next year. But I don't feel that we're that, we haven't planned that much on the more conservative side of things. And we're just kind of more responsive to things. And I think it lends itself to more of a all or nothing approach. But it's taken 50, 60 years to get to this point. And I often look at it and go, well, how do we get out of this point? How do we walk back from where we're at? If we demand it all today, is there a way to walk back? And so I always stay torn, trying to decide, can I vote for, or, say I support a bill that has things in it I don't like, or knowing that I plan to come back next year and work on it, or do I just have to insist on it being kind of an all or nothing approach to try and make sure that we only support, things that would never lead to something bad? And so I've just been curious, and I wanted to hear you guys' thoughts on it, because I think this is one of the biggest conundrums for a lot of responding to bills. They can send out a flood of bills, and they get very tired of people saying, no, 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 no. And they push back, and I know there's a whole political side to that. I know all kinds of things related to that aren't good. But I have been curious to say, what are we doing to respond back? Are we being proactive enough? Are we planning enough? Are we thinking enough? Do we have a long-term vision with where we're headed and how to get there? And can we take it piece by piece? Or are we just subject to responding to what they put out? And so again, just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on some of those things to see if you've thought about it or had experiences with it, or have principles or ideas you think might be helpful as we evaluate that.
I appreciate your thoughts. I think sometimes we do want all or nothing, but I do feel like there's something going on. I think there's a few bills, because the governor and lieutenant governor know that they've lost there's a lot of Utahns that do not feel the elections are transparent and fair, which I don't believe they are. But I know, like HB 27, increasing size of precincts, I think there's a few bills working together, but I know this one is for sure a problem. There's no direct accountability to the people. With the LG being on the combined ticket now, that's for sure a problem. But having the governor and auditor and Senate appoint, I just feel like in Utah, and sometimes these positions are selected, not elected, and I feel like this is, I don't know if it's much better, because the auditor and the Senate. And anyway, I agree. But if we don't vote for something like this, then we'll be left with the LG over elections. So I don't know.
Yeah, and then you're back at the same place of, well, the governor completely controls the election, right? And it's like, well, what do we do?
I think this is like trying to get people to feel like elections are safer in Utah, but yeah, I don't think it ends up much better, but yeah, what do you do?
Yeah, and for sure, you have to be aware of things. They will often change things to say they did something, but it didn't really change things, or it just made it worse, and that's not uncommon. Jill? And you're on mute, Jill.
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
Yep.
Now I lost my train of thought, but I hate for politicians to, assign people or in any committee. But I kind of feel this bill, I mean, does it make it 20% better than where we were? Do we go from an F to a D minus or, yeah, but I just don't like politicians electing people. I think they're electing their own people for the committee.
Yeah, and there is a slight restriction, or a pretty large restriction. The initial committee is limited to county clerks. So there's only 29 people they can choose from. And we elect the county clerks.
Right, but then
So
the governor would still appoint some, right?
yeah, so the governor would appoint 2 county clerks. I'm just saying that this bill at least limits the governor's selection pool. They can't just have any person they want. They have to actually be a county clerk. So there's 29 people they could choose from.
Okay.
And they would take 5 of those 29. And then again, if those people start going crazy, you technically could elect out your county clerk. But once that initial selection committee's over, it's kind of on autopilot and it's running its own thing. So it gets a little more detached from people. But one of the things I wonder about with it is I say, well, if we actually create the elections office, if that's the first step, could we be proactive and say, okay, now we need some more accountability where the election officer is, subject to a recall election, or we just change it to say instead of this committee appointing it, we're actually going to elect them, or something like that. Once the system's in place, it's a little bit easier to adjust it moving forward. And my question is, to your point, do we go from an F to a D? If we do, can we then go from a D to a C the next year and C to a B the next year and incrementally work on it if we're proactive about it? Or does this just spell doom and it's like, oh, I'll just be forever entrenched and, type thing? I don't know because we can't fully predict the future, but I've often wondered on that. But Brian, curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I have a lot of skepticism on election inaccuracies in a lot of ways. I think elections are fairly accurate, or at least as accurate as they could be. But when you're looking at gerrymandering specifically, I have very large concerns. What I'm not sure entirely is if this this is an effort to keep Utah red instead of turning full with all of this incoming population, or if it's more about maintaining Utah's. I mean, I don't know if this is the right language, but I do feel that Utah has a ruling class in a lot of ways. There's a small group of families that have controlled Utah politics for a long time. I'm wondering if this is kind of an extension of that. I'm still not sure if this expands the powers of, let's say, this election officer would have more impact over elections than the LG currently does. And that's still my biggest question, like if this is actually a power grab in disguise. I mean, those are the things I'm anxious about with this.
Yeah, it's a good question. As far as I've seen in it, and I haven't been through every little thing because it's a very long bill. We're only a quarter of the way down and we're at 2,250 lines. It's very much modeled after the LG's office. But to the point, and again, this is the one piece though that's still fascinating to me. We talk about, you know, whether it's a small group of families, whether it's the governor's friends, however we want to phrase it, they are limited to choosing county clerks, at least initially. Once they've done that, let's see. I guess this may be this may be a slight ambiguity in the law currently, because I'm looking to see, can they appoint someone that's not a county clerk? Because they specifically say you can select or reselect a county clerk, meaning you don't have to change county clerks. And so the question would be if they have to be county clerks, because if it's limited to county clerks that serve on this, and nobody else, then again, we could vote out a county clerk technically, if they were a little out there or something. And there's 29 county clerks in Utah. So I still am personally interested about kind of a check and balance to say, is it a county clerk? But to your point, Brian, if it's a power grab or not. There was a lot of talk and a lot of people telling their representatives they wanted Utah to stop having the LG's office and the governor's office be so involved with the elections. And they wanted something more independent. And so to that point, then the question is this person doing it out of a pure heart, you know, or is it a power grab type thing? We don't know. We'd have to look in detail. To be clear, this bill, if you come on up, scroll forever. It's still such a long list of laws being changed. It's wild. It's still sitting in the House Rules Committee. And I don't personally believe this bill is going to go anywhere this session. I don't think the governor or lieutenant governor are that interested in an elections office personally. But maybe, you know, maybe we'll be surprised by that. I don't know. But I think that, again, to me, one of the takeaways with the bill, there's obviously the merits of the bill, which could be a concern or not a concern. But to me, it's more when a bill has something we like and something we don't like, what do we do? Because most of these bills aren't perfect. We don't live in a perfect world. And do we move forward? Do we not? And I think people find themselves in this quandary all the time. And there's very little discussion about how do we know when to say no, or how do we know to say yes, even if it's not perfect. And again, it's one that I don't profess to have all answers on. And so it's one reason why I wanted to throw it out to see if you guys had thoughts outside of the elections office, just bigger picture of maybe something good, maybe something not. How do we decide what to do with it?
Austin, can you tell me quick where you went to find this info right here on the screen, where the bill is at as far as the readings and?
Yes. So if you pull it up, it defaults to bill text up here at the top. If you click on this, there's 3 columns. So there's then status, and it will go through, tell you every vote, everything. Once a vote takes place, you'll be able to click on it and see exactly who voted for it or who voted against it.
Oh, awesome. That's helpful.
So they will tell you that. And then if it's scheduled for a hearing or a debate, they'll list it in this 3rd column.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. That's super helpful for me. I should have probably known that, but I didn't.
But yeah, but this is nice. If you ever want to know who voted for or supported something, check here. Once a vote takes place, there will be little hyperlink numbers that you click on and it shows you that. So, but keep that in mind a little bit, because I think, again, one of the hardest pieces of operating in our world is, can we throw our support behind something that's not perfect if it moves us from an F to a D, or a D to a C? Or do we just have to insist on a jump from an F to an A and only support those? Because most of the groups I see that just insist on the F to the A approach, I don't feel they get there. I don't feel they get a lot of support because it feels too big a jump for most people. But we'll talk a little bit, go through a couple of things quickly here. This is HB 300. And this is also in response to a fair amount that's gone on of conversation. So this is a bill that's definitely in response to people's conversations and concerns. A big concern with mail-in ballots are that you can't verify who actually filled it out. So there's no way to know if it was filled out, if it went to an empty home and somebody else filled it out or whatnot. They have the signature side. But most people, anyone that owns real property, their signature's on file publicly. And so if someone really wanted to, they could, it's not that hard to find someone's signature, I guess, and copy it. So what this person's proposing, Representative Burton, is proposing that the ballot gets mailed to the voter. So you still get a ballot mailed to you, but to return it, you have to go to a polling place and provide valid voter identification. Unless you've applied to return it by mail because you can't get to a polling location, or you're a military or overseas voter, or there's a couple other legal grounds. So this is meant to be something that requires voter ID. And this proposal, I hadn't heard this one before. A lot of people talked about they want to go back to just pure in-person voting. And I'm not saying I'm for or against that, just talking about a lot of the conversation. I've told a number of people, I said, I think that's too big a jump to go directly back to in-person voting when you've had mail-in ballots for so long. I don't think that will pass. And I think he felt the same way and proposed kind of a middle ground to say, you still get it mailed to you, and then you take the time to go back and show your ID and submit it. So that's one that's there proposed if you're interested in supporting or opposing that type of bill. This one, I'm fascinated. Utah has just been incessant lately about mandating the social media verify users' ages. They passed a law mandating the social media verify users' ages. It was put on hold. It's being evaluated by courts as whether it's unconstitutional or not. They have one for pornography, mandating that pornography verify users' ages. And then they're proposing the same thing for app stores. The app stores have to verify users' ages. And Utah's just so insistent on this. They're saying we're going to protect the kids. I'll share with you my concern. One of the effects of the law in this scenario is that when they mandate that you have to verify a user age, they can't just say you have to just verify kids. There's no way to do that because a kid could just lie and say they're an adult. So the only way to know if a kid is truly a kid is to verify everybody. When they then have to verify everyone, you can no longer sign up and just create an account and say you're whoever, say your birth date's whenever. They now tie it to you directly. Google, for example, can terminate your email account and your ability to use Google services if you don't follow their terms of use or their conditions and policies. My wife has had her Google account terminated, one she had for over 20 years. They terminated it when she was emailing representatives in Utah about a bill that she was very opposed to. And she sent each representative an email. In Utah, that's like 104 people or something like that. I forget exactly the number. And Google terminated her account and said, you violated our terms and conditions. And her thing was really, I saw the email. It just said, I'm very opposed to this. This is why. It wasn't angry, wasn't mean, wasn't calling names. And when they terminated her account, they just instantly locked her out of it. There was no notice, no anything. She lost her emails and contacts of 20 years. And they said, you can't have an account with us. And I look at that and I go, if social media is required by law to verify us all, our phones, because if you even want a phone, you have to connect to the App Store, all these different things. They will know exactly who you are. And then the companies, if you ever offend them in any way, shape, or form, you're just now on their blacklist, and you can't use a Google account again, or can't use an Apple account again, or whatnot. And I just look at this and I go, I'm not a fan at all of mandating by law that these companies have to verify users' ages. I have deep concerns with the checks and balance side that comes with that. But Utah is super into it and loves it. So, Brian?
Yeah, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I think if this is a half measure at best. Virtue signaling is probably all it is. And it is frustrating that they're trying to pass laws that don't functionally fix the problems. I mean, social media is deliberately addictive, and I do think it's the root cause of increased suicide rates, as well as increased political extremism in this country. But verifying, like age verification, is not going to make a difference there. And I find it really frustrating that there's so much ignorance about technology and the halls of power, not just in this country, but in this state specifically that touts itself as a technological hub.
Silicon Slopes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and these are, it's common, like you say, the virtue signaling. I feel it's the same, where we're like, oh, we're going to protect kids. And we go out and going, we just literally handed these companies a lot of power, a lot of information, a lot of data. And to your point, I don't believe it will protect children. Because most parents are voluntarily giving their kids all these things anyways. There might be a few that are sneaking or stealing something, I don't know. But most parents give their kids pretty free reign on their devices. So
Yeah, it's cheaper than a babysitter. And I think in a lot of situations, they don't really have any other choice but to give them some distractions.
yeah, or they feel they don't. That's where they've come to for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't love these as I watch them come. That's fun. This one is quite fascinating. Very, very fascinating bill to me. This is, so there's a legislative auditor general, and this position is serves at the for the legislature. They can go out and audit things that are taking place. But they have this, so they're clarifying some of the authority, saying that the legislature has inherent inquiry and investigatory power. So they're making a claim that they've got this inherent power to inquire and investigate. But one of the things specifically that they come in to do, and this one, if I wasn't a lawyer, I wouldn't have even had a passing thought on it. But it says, if requested by the legislative auditor general, a lawyer, so I'm like, oh, what do I have to do now? Shall provide information, materials, or resources relating to the representation of an entity. And I went, whoa, 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 what is this talking about here? And so I went up to say, what is an entity? And we come up, entity is defined. Entity means a government organization or a receiving organization. So we say, what's a receiving organization? And we say a receiving organization means an organization that receives public funds. That is not a government organization. So government organization is defined too. That's basically the government, but any entity that receives funds, that's not the government. So crazy amounts that receives public funds, sorry. So any hospital that receives Medicaid, any hospital that receives Medicare, any school that, or any food company that sells lunches to the elementary school, Anyone that's getting public funds is now, according to this bill, if it goes through, subject to having their records seized through their attorney. And in America, the attorney-client privilege has been a very hallowed and protected privilege for quite some time, saying that people have a right to talk with attorneys, get legal advice, and things without the government or others knowing what they talk to their attorney about. I actually believe that there should be some checks and balances on that. I don't believe that the attorney-client privilege should exist as full and complete as it does in our current society. But they are expressly creating a loophole in the attorney-client privilege to say that any entity that receives public funds can now have all their records seized by the legislature or the legislative auditor general as part of the legislature's inherent investigatory power. And again, it's easier to seize it from the lawyer because the lawyer, by rule, we have to maintain client files. We have to keep things there. You know, we've got all the contracts. We've got all these things. We've got all the advice we gave. And so they can come back and say, oh, did you tell them that this might be illegal? Yeah, I told them it might be illegal. That's a pretty dangerous spot for these entities to be in, to have their attorneys now subject to investigation whenever the government wants. And this is something that I told people with the homeschool funds. So they've got the funds that they give to homeschools and private schools. I said, I can guarantee you the government's going to come in and want to audit your receipt of those funds if you're this entity. And a lot of people go, oh, there's nothing in the, the Utah Fits All scholarship or whatnot that allows that. And this is here saying, oh no, we can just go directly to the lawyer and request these things. And we can know if the lawyer told you that what you're doing might be illegal. And so we can come after you for knowingly breaking the law or doing different things. So I guess I'm kind of curious to know if any of you have immediate thoughts or reactions to this, where they're proposing the ability to break the attorney-client privilege on any entity that receives public funds.
Is this information that would have been available to the state without a warrant previously?
No.
So it does allow them to circumvent that, like without just a reasonable cause, I guess they can investigate entities.
Yeah, there's no cause or anything. Just we can come as part of our inherent investigatory power, they say. No warrant required, anything. It just says if requested by the legislative auditor general, a lawyer shall provide the info.
Do you know if there's any specific case or reason behind this, or they're just trying to expand their powers?
I don't know, other than I don't know if it has to do with the fallout from Sean Reyes.
He was able to hide so much.
He hid a lot behind the attorney-client privilege. There's a ton hidden behind the attorney-client privilege. And again, I'm a fan of some appropriate checks and balance to the attorney-client privilege. I could start to articulate quite a few areas where it would be good to not have the privilege and make it be more open. But this is specifically going after a lawyer of an entity and making it so that they can just take it from the lawyer. And so any of my clients that might receive public funds at any point, which again, if you get grant money from the government, if you do any of these things, suddenly whatever you talk to your attorney about, the government can know if they come out and ask for it. And as the client, you don't have a lot of ways to fight this because they come to your lawyer and say, hey, you have to do this by law. I'm just going, oh, so now I'm going to become the government's mole, essentially. They'll just come out and ask for whatever
Yeah.
info they want of me. Like, I don't want to be a government spy. And this is
Other
essentially enlisting me as a government spy.
The other two questions I've got on this are its likelihood to pass and if there's any federal checks on this.
As far as I know, there are no federal checks on this. And it would, public funding, I'm pretty sure includes federal money as well, if you take federal money. Jill, did you have something?
Yeah, I do have a question. So on the status of this bill, it says it's not considered. Does that mean it's dead?
Let's see. I wouldn't count it as dead yet because there's no vote. I don't think things are dead until they vote against it. Because
So why
they've
would they
done,
just say not considered? Did they
I
pull
think,
it or?
yeah, my bet is what happened is that it was on the calendar and then they pulled it and didn't consider it in that committee meeting when it was on the calendar is my bet. But I think it could get recalendared. But I think one of the reasons I bring this up, you know, whether or not it gets through, but this is also Brady Brammer. He's very well respected. He's a new senator. He was in the House before. But I look at these things and I just go, man, they're sneaky things. These are just little changes. But this is one that I think any corporate attorney would have serious heartburn about, saying, oh, I'm being enlisted as a government spy now. I just have to turn over my records if requested. So definitely one that I'm concerned about. There's plenty of others you can see up here. There's quite a few we can talk about, but I'll make sure we're slightly over. But again, the invitation is pick a bill or two or a subject or two. Follow up on it. You don't have to follow up on everything, but it doesn't hurt to send some emails and say some things. And then we do our best, right? But I think ultimately too, the more I look at this and the more I see what's going on, the more I go, we need to get proactive and do some planning ourselves, some long-term planning, so that we can start to move the needle from an F to a D to a C to a B to an A and get us back to a good place. Because there are people working to move the needle. I think we can see a lot of that where they send out floods of things and then we're busy trying to respond and whatnot. And so I'm a huge fan of trying to coordinate some proactive kind of longer term solutions. So if any of you want to continue those types of talks or discussions, I would love to. But I appreciate you joining us today. We'll talk more next week. Next week, we'll try and go through a few more bills. Sorry to talk a little bit more about the principal side, but it's still one that I get torn on. So hopefully you guys can reflect on that and then let us know if you have any ideas over the week of how we decide what we support or what we don't if it's not perfect. So thanks for joining.
Thanks, Austin.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Austin.
Austin. Your time every week. Thank you.